Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Richest Men in Town podcast. I'm Mike Freeman, and along with my good friend and co-host Tyler Gould, we're excited to welcome you to our little podcast project. Tyler and I are just a couple of middle-aged husbands and dads driven to live our best lives. We want to be better every day, so here we'll be sitting down with great people. Not famous people, but great people that we admire, to learn their secret to living the rich life. Probably not the rich life you're thinking of. Our guests come in humbled and surprised at the invitation and hopefully leave feeling proud and grateful, realizing just how good they really have it. So pull up a chair, stay a while, and raise a glass with us as we toast our guests to the richest men in town.
All right, Tyler Gould, we just spent a couple of hours like we do this week with Dan Ferrarese. Talk to me about our time.
It was great, man.
About our time with Dan.
Yeah, it's like we joke about this a lot about we record these episodes in the middle of the week. They go live on Monday, but we joke a lot about this being our sort of midweek church, right? We get to spend time with some really good people. Dan's a great guy. He was introduced to us through a mutual friend, Stephen Mitchell, who has been on this show, and Dan didn't disappoint. You know, I think if you're interested in the idea of understanding your true potential and developing and the importance of developing relationships, you're going to love some time with Dan.
If you are new to this program, you need to find episode 11 with Stephen Mitchell, Time Slow Sweet, right? So let's put that aside. Dan, I don't know if we've ever had this, Tyler. We cut it. He stays on. We keep going. There's probably another half episode that may not see the light of day from this episode. I mean, Dan was authentic.
Yeah.
Dan was real. He was vulnerable. He lets us in. He talks some relationship things that just left us edified.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things I love about our time with our guests is we give them a little prep with some questions that we want them to be thinking about, but we really don't cover those questions in the episode. They just kind of organically flow. And I felt like that was evident today after we ended the show, because we just continued going and Dan continued to teach, and there was some powerful stuff.
It wasn't like an on-off switch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It just continued to flow.
Just kept going. Yeah.
Dan's an artist. Dan's creative, but Dan teaches us about creativity and what that spirit of creativity looks like in our lives, in our work.
Yeah.
In the work that's before us, right?
Yeah.
I love that. And I love that. Face it, go through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that too.
We talk about overcoming that fear, overcoming that internal critic, right? That what are other people going to think? You know what? Forget that. Turn into that. Just have fun with it.
Yeah. Well, and we had a good conversation about generalists versus specialists.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we learned tonight is that if you're a generalist like myself, you better marry a specialist. That's what's going to really help you out,
Yeah. To Dan, to Cathy, to the whole family. He gets into even, specifically calling out why he is so proud of each daughter. It's just a special thing. Dan, again, masterclass. And I'm so grateful for Stephen for connecting us with Dan. And here it is, right? We're 90 episodes in and we collect another one.
Yeah, it was great tonight. I loved every minute of it. Lots of stuff for me to think about. And lots of, lots of ways to create relationships, grow those relationships, and become better and become the best version of ourselves. Dan taught some great lessons tonight.
Yeah. So, hey, Tyler, tomorrow, brush your teeth, look yourself in the mirror and just say, walk in confidence.
Love it, man. Not arrogance, but confidence.
Let's walk in confidence this week.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. That was fun. Enjoy this week's episode of The Richest Men in Town with Dan Ferrarese. Okay, are you ready for this? Are you ready for this debate that is lingering in a few circles of mine with Richest Men in Town former guests?
Okay, yeah, let's hear it. Yeah.
It's the argument of Nate Ward, all in on my strengths, or jack of all trades. right?
I am sort of, look, I'll tell you this.
A specialist, a generalist.
No. Okay, I'll give you my opinion on this. I feel like I am a really good jack of all trades. But to finish that statement, it is master of none. And I'm not a big fan of the ending of that statement. Jack of all trades, master of none. I'd rather be the guy,
which is a knock. It's a knock on the jack, right?
Yeah, because look, if I play the guitar, I play the ukulele, I play, I dabble in some things, but I'm not the guy that's going to sit down for 3 hours a day and just bang stuff out until I become the expert. Maybe that's a weakness, my friend.
I don't know, because I think that there's two schools of thought, and they are at war in my head.
Well, break them down for me. Let me.
Because I remember having a conversation with you saying, "What does my patriarchal blessing say I'm good at?" And feed that. Right?
I agree.
I'm going to feed that. I'm going to develop those talents. Right? Versus
tells me to work out,
maybe dabble in something that I'm not good at. Not that I can't ever be good at it, but there's just some things that are going to, what comes easy to me, and let's go be amazing at that versus let's be good at a whole bunch of things.
I agree with you.
We talked about this before. Do you want somebody that's amazing or a team of good?
Okay. I want a team of good. I agree with you 100% on that idea though. Like, let me just develop the thing but then in the back of my head, I always have this thought that like, we have this unrealized potential of talent. And if we just focus some energy on certain things, like I was telling Ricky, I'm in the middle of wrapping up a couple things educationally, and it's finally down to the end, and I'm done. And I was driving with Ricky, and I said, as soon as I wrap this up, I want to take piano lessons. Like I was just like, that's where I'm going next. I don't know, man. Like I'm diving into the next thing. So I don't know. Maybe that's
now from a richest man standpoint.
Yeah.
The generalist might be the cooler guy to sit around a campfire with. Yeah. But you know what? Tonight we've got Dan Ferrarese coming in.
Yeah.
And I don't know where he's at with horse riding, but we are going to hit him with the question. What's one thing a man should be able to do? And I'm curious, generalist or specialist? Are you good with letting Dan in?
Yeah, I am.
Dan, welcome to the richest man in town. How are you, brother?
Thank you. I'm good. It's been a long day, but a good day.
All right.
That's good. That's good. I'll take a long good day over anything else. Hey, we have some things to throw at you. All right.
Okay, let's throw it.
Tyler and I are having a heated discussion about something. And there does appear to be two schools of thought, and they are battling each other. What's better, Dan? To be good at a lot of things or amazing at a few things? A generalist or a specialist?
Well, you're talking to a generalist, first off, but there are a few things that this generalist is really good at. So I'm sorry, I got to go right down the middle.
Okay, so as a generalist, are you from I'm trying to develop as many talents as I can? Where does that generalist, or is it just an overall curiosity about life? Where does the generalist come from?
I think it is an overall curiosity about life. Some of my earliest memories are I've always been good with my hands and eyes. Is my parents, I must have been 4 or 5. They gave me a DC-10 with a little controller and flashing lights and the propellers going around for Christmas. And they gave it to me on Christmas Eve. By Christmas morning, it was in pieces, and I had no idea as a 4-year-old how to put it back together, but I thought it was cool. So yeah, I've been very curious most of my life. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the next question we often entertain with our guests. What is one thing, Dan, that every man should be able to do?
Should is the key word here, I think.
Yeah. So far, I haven't done any of these things that people have brought up.
Correct.
So.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too deep too quick here, but I'd say self-awareness. I think most men are just really struggling with that issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I've been one of them for sure.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Well, there's a propensity for people to believe they're better than average when they ask themselves how they're doing. Right? Like,
Exactly.
how are you as a communicator in your home? Oh, I'm amazed. Oh, I'm really good at that. Right? Like,
my wife would disagree, but you know.
Yeah. There is a little bit of a pull there. We usually tend to rate ourselves a little better than we are.
I think so. I think that's just, general fear and insecurity. But of course, we wouldn't say that about ourselves typically. But yeah, I think it's true.
So I was telling Mike, I said, the problem with the generalist, because I'm with you, Dan. I'm a generalist. There's a lot of things I like and a lot of things that I'm interested in, and I'm not really good at really any of them, but I like them, right? So I was telling Mike, the problem with that for me is that the guy that's the jack of all trades, to finish that statement, is master of none. And I don't know that I really like that part.
Yeah, I've never liked that. Yeah, I've never liked that. Yeah.
Well, we can't let something Ben Franklin said a couple of centuries ago, strike at the idea or the worth and value of being a generalist.
Sure.
Ben Franklin has been tearing me down for years, man. I mean, it's just
oh my gosh. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, the adage is there. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a true statement. Because, like Dan said, I'm a generalist, but there are some things, that I am really good at.
So let me give you an example, if I could. I'm an artist and visual artist, and I have many mediums that I deal with. Anything from ice sculpturing with chainsaws to glass to wood to metal to sewing, quilts, painting, murals, etc. So when I teach art, what I tell people is how does this particular medium, whatever it is, inform you? And then how does that inform maybe this? So in other words, if I'm working on a glass project and it's brittle and it's got its properties, how can I translate that into metal? Or how can I take that metal sculpture and translate it into food? Because I'm also a culinary artist. And so it's actually it's a building thing that keeps going and going and going in my life. And I love that. And I love teaching that. And I love experiencing that. So, but am I a master painter? No. Am I a master sculptor? No way. But have I done some works that have been really good and special? You betcha.
So when you're looking at something, Dan, when you're looking at that piece of metal or that food or whatever the medium is that you're looking at, is it just that's in your head? You're seeing the possibilities of what that
totally. Yeah, you betcha. And I think that's where generalism actually has been an adventure and frustrating and wonderful altogether. It's a great thing, because I know many artists and or culinary artists or chefs who are just absolutely amazing at something, but there's not a lot of translation there.
It's interesting because I think that as a generalist, speaking as a generalist, Dan.
yes, we're on the same team.
We're on the same team. Yeah. Speaking as a generalist, I am not afraid to dive into really pretty much anything, right?
Oh, me too. Fearless.
It's a project.
You gotta be fearless.
Yeah, I'm diving in. Now, my wife would tell you that has been the downfall of many a project. My desire to just dive in. I've got this. I can figure this out. I think I know what's happening here.
Sure.
But I think there's something to be said for that. No, that lack of fear, right? To be able to look at something.
You betcha.
Let me feel this out. See what it.
You betcha. You betcha. I mean, I think it started with that plane when I was 3 or 4 or 5, and just to give you a quick example, I don't want to go too far into this, but I now am, after 37 years in culinary world and another 12 in healthcare, I am now at a place where I am in a job where I am in charge of all maintenance and landscaping and housekeeping, and primarily from my management skills. But I through trial and error that you just mentioned, I have learned so much. By a vendor will come in and he's a specialist in the air conditioning, heating, HVAC, and I'll just listen. I'll talk and I'll walk and I'll listen and I'll get my hands involved. And I'll tell you what, I actually can intelligently run a huge community with God's grace, of course, and a lifetime of building on what you just said. Taking those chances, learning, making a fool of yourself, breaking something, not breaking. So, oh yeah, that's how that works. And it's a puzzle. It's literally a puzzle. And I love that.
I do too.
Well, Dan, I'm excited to have you on because every once in a while it's a Tyler friend or it's a Mike friend or it's an hour friend. You are a friend of an hour friend.
That's right.
That's right. Yes.
So we reached out to our community of guests and said, who do you know, right? That would maybe meet that lofty bar of the richest men in town. And Stephen Mitchell reached out to us and said, you got to talk to Dan.
Yeah, he warned me he was going to do this. I'm telling you.
Well, that's actually better than a lot of our guests have done.
Yeah.
A lot of them just straight up giving us a cold call, and we're just like calling people, and they're like, "Who is this?
Who is this?" Yeah.
But I'm excited because I know we love Stephen, and if Stephen is coming to us and saying, "I got a guy you need to meet," there's some things in your life, Dan, that are going to make Tyler and I better. Because in the end, that's what it is about. The three of us building up, edifying ourselves, and then we leave this conversation better. The fact that it's going to blow up in Kenya in a couple of weeks, that's
that's right.
That's just icing on the cake, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's icing on the cake for our friends in Kenya. But when you look at this art, born that way, made that way?
Both.
So growing up, was there somebody that came to you and said, you're really like, was there somebody that stoked that fire or fueled that fire that maybe pushed you or nudged you in that direction?
Probably high school was the first time I actually realized somebody thought more of me in that regard. An art teacher said something, Mr. Stanfreeth, he said something to me one time, and I was incredulous. I had no idea. In fact, I didn't actually believe him. He said, I get students in here all the time, Dan. I've been doing this for 20 whatever years, and you've got something special. You need to develop that. And I looked at him and I thought, no one has ever said anything like that to me in my life, including my parents and anybody else.
Really quick, Dan, what was the context of that moment? Are we in between classes? Is it in front of everyone? What was the context?
We were doing a special project where you take different colored tile, and you break them into teeny tiny little pieces and make mosaics, much like the Greeks used to do with the tile floors that they would make, and they would have pictures of people and whatnot. And I did one, and then something he developed, and I would take a piece of wood and cut out a shape. And in my case, I had a couple of geese and Canadian geese, and I made Canadian geese with broken tile bits. And he looked at that and he says, people don't do this the first time out. This is really special. Thank you. Thank you.
Was that when you heard those words from that teacher, was it an immediate a desire on your part to kind of continue to develop that, or was that sort of just the beginning of that?
Yeah, life got in the way, of course. That was high school. And then I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to be all these things that had nothing to do with art. And so there wasn't a whole lot that I can remember, at least, of people coming alongside me and saying I had something special about me. So that definitely stuck with me. And and then, other people along the way would say that as well. But for the most part, I didn't really come into my own art-wise until I was in my, mid-30s, 40s. No, actually 40s. So I remember I was in the culinary world. I owned 2 different restaurants in 2 different places. And it was Christmas time, and my younger sister, Lisa, was working with me at the time. And we were in Reading. Ferrarese Ristorante is what it was called. And I was doing an antipasto tray. It's an Italian thing that you do if you're a caterer and you happen to be raised the way I was, which is a crazy Italian family. But anyway, I got into this tray, and I started doing some folds and some things, and made flowers out of vegetables and did stuff. just because I wanted to be special. I wanted to please people and also to stand out. And she says, Dan, you're an artist. And I said, I'm not. She says, no, Dan, you don't understand. You just made this tray in 15 minutes that nobody here can make. And I don't see it out there in the world. So, you're an artist. And that shocked me. I think it brought me back to Stan Freeth and the high school. And that was many years later. And then what instigated that even further was when I got very ill for many years. And I was no longer able to do a normal job. And so I turned to art, and I turned to a group of men who were in art as well. And Stephen was a part of that, of course. And I had no idea what was in me until I started experimenting with all different kinds of things. And it became my ministry. It became something special for me to watch the expression on people's faces, to bring joy, to bring beauty into their lives and to affect them in some way. That was what it was about for me.
Dan, can you define what it means to be an artist? If someone says, Dan, you're an artist, I think you're an artist. If you had to define that, how would you define that?
Well, there's the world stereotypes. I often mock myself, artsy fartsy, oversensitive and out of touch with reality and all these kinds of things. Right. So I think it's somebody who sees the possibilities and seizes those possibilities, whether they befuddle the medium or the project, or whether it's successful in a medium way, or whether it's something fantastic. That's almost secondary. What's the most important thing is to look at life like what I was saying. Okay, I'm working on this, and all my young adult life, my only medium was food, and then later became ice in food, and then later hot sugar, where you color it and you make sculptural pieces, and it was just a natural to go from that to what people would consider real art, traditional art, where there are sculptural pieces, painting, that kind of thing. So, like you said, I love what you said. You just go for it. Just do it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's.
No, I love the answer to that, because you said as someone who can see the possibilities.
Yeah.
And I like how you talk about your transition from, starting out with just food, right? Starting out with food and then moving to ice and sugar, but then to what people would classify as traditional artwork. But just seeing the possibilities in what you're working with, I think, is a great answer. And I asked that question because I think there's people who would say, I would love to be an artist, but don't classify themselves as an artist because they can't paint, or they can't paint, they
can't draw, they have they can't do a thing.
Right.
I have taught classes where in art, I've taught a number of classes where people come to me from the business world, and here they are, these CEOs and these different people, and I'm teaching them. There's a group in Reading called Leadership Reading I used to belong to, and my job was to infect them with art. And so I would take these people and I would tell them, look, if you were an office person and you're a front desk person and you answer phones with panache and you file with a really good system and you know how to multitask, that is creative.
Yeah.
That is all super creative. So let's see if we can translate that into a picture, and so I would do different things to bring that out with them.
Almost channeling that that creativity. I admire the two of you in this conversation. I feel a little bit outside looking in on that risk it, right?
Oh, I bet you are very creative in some ways, Mr.
Oh, no,
you are.
Yeah, I'm not going to dismiss that, but the risk it.
Oh.
The jump in and do it, right? In fact, one of our questions that we actually give to guests doesn't come up a lot in the podcast is this, that if the notion of failure was not a risk, what would you go after? What would you start right now? And I think there's so many people on the cusp of amazing things, right? They've got amazing bestsellers in their head, right? Or they've got amazing projects, or they've got amazing ideas, and they're just afraid. They're afraid.
You bet.
They're afraid to jump in, and of course they're afraid to fail, right? You jumped in. You're telling us that you ran 2 restaurant businesses. I don't think there's anything more risky, right?
Amen to that.
In a restaurant business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through how you get into that?
Well, I was born into it, 3rd generation. Grandpa was in the Bay Area, an immigrant from Italy, and he opened up a fruit stand, and then that became a fruit and vegetable stand, which then became more. And then he moved to the high desert, a place called Apple Valley, and he opened up an Italian deli / liquor store / many other things. And
what was his name?
I grew up in
what
that
was
world.
His name?
Ugo Ferrarese. You know, hey, yeah. So he was quite a character. And then my dad, who played pro ball when he retired, he joined the family business with my uncle. So it was a real family affair. There was aunts and uncles and grandma and all loud, all annoying Italians, right? And it's just, hey, that's not the way you cook. What are you doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
you like how he just kind of glazed over his dad who played pro ball.
I know. Don't believe me. I made a note. We're going back to that, but
there's a couple points. We're going to put a pin in that one and come back to that.
Right.
So growing up in that world, I mean, when I was 10, I started sorting back in the day. I'm aging myself here, but back in the day, there was, everybody had pop bottles or glass bottles for everything. There was no aluminum. And it was either steel or glass. And so my job was to take these bottles that people would recycle, and I would put them in a bin in 110-degree weather in the Mojave Desert, and to get $1 a day from Grandpa, right? So that developed into a big stick of salami, slippery salami on a slicing machine that could take your finger off in a second, right? And I'm 10, and I'm slicing salami, and my uncle would come up behind me. Hey, that's not the way you do it. Put it on the angle. What are you doing? And so it was a really special place. It was really insane, but it was really a special place. It was kind of like there used to be a program on TV called Cheers. It was this bar where everybody kind of gathered because it was a friendly place. This is what this place was like. It was Hugo's Deli.
Wow.
And we had salamis hanging from the ceiling on hooks. We had big, huge 200-pound wheels of cheddar cheese with black wax on it. We had a wine room. We had a deli that was huge. We had, we had a meat market. We had a gourmet section. We had the first gas station in Southern California that was self-serve. We were the place because it was a teeny tiny town at that point, and there was no supermarkets. There was a few markets, but no supermarkets. And so everybody came there, and they loved our food. We had rotisserie chickens going and ribs, and it was a crazy, wonderful place. So I grew up in that, and that was just kind of like my world. I didn't know it was special at the time. It was just what you did. So
zooming out on that and looking, if we could hover above those moments, right? And look down at your 10-year-old self surrounded by family on the very
slicing
dangerous
machine.
Slicing machine.
Yes.
If we could look down on that, are there lessons that you see now that are deep in your soul from the time that you spent with family in that sort of crazy environment?
Yeah, I would say my work ethic, taking ownership, even at a young age, of saying, if my job is only to slice salami and sort bottles and stock the refrigerator, do it with ownership, do it with integrity. And, my whole family, as I said, were loud and annoying. And if you didn't, you would hear about it. So, it was drilled into me. There you go. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Can you talk? So thanks for setting that stage for growing up. And can you talk to us a little bit about your father and about your mother.
Well, we were based. I was born in the East Bay, Oakland, and then we lived in Pleasant Hill. If you guys know where that is, and that was our home base. And then Dad had been playing ball a total of 15 years, but when I was I don't know, I guess very little, we would travel all over the United States. So home was all over the place, but we would have a home base off season there. Then he would go to spring training, and he would then
your
station
dad was
himself.
a professional baseball player.
Yeah. And it was no big deal for me, because all my friends' dads were baseball players. Like, yeah, whatever, this is what Dad does, right? So
interesting.
yeah, so we went all over the place. He was with the Indians, the White Sox, Phillies, Orioles, and Cardinals for 15 years, bouncing around as a relief pitcher. And he grew up. He was a
So
bigger than
cool.
life. He is a bigger than life. He's still alive. He's 92. Bigger than life personality. He's a pretty amazing person. He's very generous. He's very annoying, and I love him to death, but very annoying person. And of course, I've been called that as well. So, like, what can I tell you? But
just so you know, I was told by my wife. She wasn't my wife at the time. I was told if I looked up annoying in the dictionary,
yeah,
she would see my face.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that sounds like something my family would say too.
I feel like that's
my Italian
transitioned
family.
Yeah.
My wife.
Yeah,
would say
I
that.
think a little bit of Mike Freeman goes a long ways.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. So anyway, getting back to family, my mom was a Wenatchee, Washington apple girl. My grandpa was an apple picker and then an apple foreman for Treetop apple juice, and so they met and got married, and then we came along as kids. There's 4 of us. I have 2 sisters.
Do you know the story of how they met?
I do. It was crazy. It's typical. My dad was, he was playing ball. He was pretty new. He had just finished. I think he was like 2 years out of high school. So he in high school as a senior. This is worth telling. He won the Lou Gehrig Trophy, which they don't even give out anymore, but that's the most valuable player in the United States. And he was given a ticker tape parade in New York City, along with his team. And he met Mrs. Gehrig and Babe Ruth. And, he played with people like Mickey Mantle and, on and on and on. Ted Williams, you name it. He's got stories from all. His storytelling is crazy. I'd have to
I've got goosebumps all over.
I'd have to dumb it down because, he tells it very colorfully.
Right.
But and to me, it was, it was just what Dad did. I can remember I think I was 5 or 6, father-son day at the field. And so I would show up and they would give us bats. And I was a tiny, skinny little dude. And they give us these full on, major league bats. And we're supposed to, they're pitching underhand to us with, these Ted Williams, those kinds of people are pitching to us, right? Tossing the ball underhand, and I couldn't even swing the bat. It's crazy. And it was kind of La La Land a little bit, but looking back at it, I could see that. But at the time, it was just normal.
Yeah,
we had a lot of famous people come through our lives and our family. It was a really interesting childhood. Yeah.
Wow.
So hold on. How did they meet?
Oh, sorry. Got sidetracked. He was playing ball for the Oakland Oaks, which was what happened before the A's came into existence. Wow. And he was one of their stars, and he was going up and down the West Coast at the time, as he tells it. And he hurt himself. So they back then there wasn't any college input hardly. It was all minor leagues or major leagues. That was all there was. So he ended up in the minor leagues for a year or two, and he was up in Wenatchee, Washington, playing with a team. And he went to a soda fountain where my mom worked, and saw this beautiful woman and just went crazy as he said it. And so he came back and invited her out to dinner. So they went to a steakhouse, which later in life they took us to and told us how wonderful the steak was. And long story. But anyway, so he finds out when he's there that he's been drafted to the Korean War. And so him and my mom, it was a whirlwind thing. I think just several months is all they knew each other. He said, I'm going to marry you. And she said, okay. So they went and got married, and he got drafted, and off he went to Hawaii, which was a stop off to go to Korea. And the story was that him and my mom were in the barracks there, and somebody found out he was a professional baseball player. And they said, you're not going to Korea. You're going to stay right here in Oahu or Honolulu, and you're going to be our pitcher for the Army. So DiMaggio brothers, Ted Williams, Mantle, 3 or 4 other big names like that, did this war effort tour. And they came together and they went out to Honolulu as part of their tour. And my dad pitched against him. And so here he is, this rookie, this little, his nickname was the midget. He was only a 5'9". So, today's baseball players, especially pitchers, are a whole lot bigger, but he was 5'9". But he had some magic in his throw. And so he ended up striking most of them out. He was so proud of it. He got a trophy for it and all that. So that's kind of how they met, and, the kind of life that they lived, we all lived up until he retired, which I was 7 when he retired.
Wow.
And that's when we moved to Apple Valley with the family business.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
A steakhouse in Wenatchee.
Steakhouse in Wenatchee. And boy, we got to see that steakhouse, and it's like, okay, Dad, it was a big thing for him. So that's great. Yeah.
That is great. Can you talk about your mom a little bit?
My mom,
your mom.
Yeah, she you asked me earlier, is this hereditary or whatever? My mom didn't know it, but she was very creative. And later in her life, she became an interior designer for homes, and she also did a lot of painting. So I was around it in that regard, and so I kind of osmosed it, but it wasn't art to me. It was just something Mom did.
Yeah.
But I always watched her. I was always, but I also watched food, and I was into dirt bikes, motorcycles. So I was into a lot of things. Wildlife. I love the outdoors. I used to hunt with my uncle. We'd hunt for birds.
Are you getting that generalist vibe, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm loving it.
I'm getting
absolutely
this.
loving
I did it all. And it was just, you grew up in the Mojave Desert back when I did in the 60s. That's when Roy and Dale were in that area, and they became family friends. And in fact, I've even catered for them when they were alive. And some really special people, really, really special people that were there. And Pearl Bailey was a big Hollywood star as well as a Broadway star. She was my den mother for Cub Scouts. And so and people would come through, Buddy Epson and Red Skelton, and all these people would come through on their way to Vegas, because that's where on a map, that's where Apple Valley is. It's on the way to Vegas from the LA area. So there was a lot of people that would come and go in our lives. In the restaurant, our restaurant was critically acclaimed for 9 years as one of the best 1,000 family restaurants in Southern California. So we were always doing something, and there was always somebody coming through. And I think I got way off the topic. I'm sorry.
No,
we were talking about my mom, and my mom.
That's all right. You can blame me.
My mom was. She passed a couple of years ago, and she was the one who would always say, Dan, I'm praying for you. Dan, I am praying for you. You okay? You okay? Especially when I was sick. And so I have a lot of good memories about my mom, but there was also some struggles in there too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting though. I love how you talk about your mom and her artistic abilities, but nobody's calling it art, right? We're just,
that's pretentious. That's pretentious.
Right. Yeah. You're right. And you're looking at it and going, gosh, you're not calling it art, but you're recognizing there's something special to what's being done.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
So Dan, it sounds like you've had some experience teaching art and teaching people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What would you say to somebody that's listening? What advice would you give them to wake up that art, wake up that inner artist, or wake up that creativity that might be like, you said she just didn't know it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
How would you encourage somebody to wake that up in them?
I did a project one time with this group from Leadership Reading. And what I did is I took some painters' canvases. They were 20 feet by, I think, 10 feet. And I took 3 of them. And I put them on the ground. And then I took the bridge, the fancy bridge.
Sundial bridge.
Thank you. I took the Sundial bridge. It was fairly new at the time. It had just been created. And I drew just with a Sharpie, I just drew the Sundial bridge on 3 canvases. So it was split into 3. It was like a triptych. And then I took that and I cut it into, and I embellished it a little bit. Some birds in there, a little bit of trees and that kind of thing. And then I cut it into squares. They were, 2 feet by 2 feet, something like that. And I took these people that I mentioned earlier that, I do typing, and I pick up phones, and I do banking, and I don't know this stuff. And I put it down front and I said, okay, there is absolutely no holds barred. If you have a piece and you don't even know where it goes and what part of the bridge it is, it doesn't matter. If you think there's sky there, put some birds in it, or put some clouds, or put some motion of some kind, and just have fun. Just have fun with your little 2-foot square. And paint colors are as outrageous as you want to go. And these people were stiffer than a brush. They were like,
those are my people. Those are my people.
I can't do that. I don't draw. I said, I already drew for you. Just fill it in. This is like coloring with a little kid, right? So just fill it in. And they did. And then I sat back and I just watched them. And for about 2 hours, the conversation level started rising. The laughter started happening. They would come over to their friends over here and their friend over there, and they would just break that down. And by the end of it, they had a blast. And so what I did after that, I told them, I'm going to show you, there's going to be a big reveal. So I took all these 2-foot squares and put them back together the way they're supposed to on a sewing machine. And I sewed them together. And then I took this huge canvas and put it up on a wall, and they had a graduation ceremony, and it was a big reveal. And what happened in their expressions and their body language was fantastic. They, oh my gosh, I am a part of this thing. I actually had a piece of this, coming from the place that, you had mentioned before, that, I'm not an artist.
Yeah.
So that really, I don't know if you get that, I'm not sure if I'm being clear, but yeah, it was, and I've also, just real quickly, I've had some other artists that called themselves artists, but they didn't do that medium. They only did this medium.
Yeah.
And I would do the same thing. Hey, let's just have fun. There's absolutely nobody here. Let's just have fun. Let's just do it. And so there's this Pied Piper, let's get excited. A sincerity, not try to make it phony. And almost always it comes out positive. Almost always they find out something new about themselves.
Well, it's interesting. It's like when the inhibitions are gone, right? Then all of a sudden it's okay.
Yeah. Nobody's judging me.
Yeah,
Nobody's judging me.
Okay, that's fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Can we dig in that a little bit? Because I remember Tyler, a while back we had Nate Ward on.
Yeah.
And Nate Ward asked us the question, how do you silence the booze? The inner booze, right? That inner critic or that self-doubt, right? And so that inhibition thing is real, but that self-doubt or that critic or what are people going to think of me can be paralyzing.
Yes, it can.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you, I think I think you could probably teach a master class on how to crush that, Dan, but how do you shut that up?
You don't, you face it, you go right through it. I had to do that with many relationships in my life that were rocky. And I think it's so easy in today's culture in general to give up on someone or a relationship or a spouse or a child. And with art, okay, I suck at this medium. I'm not a painter. I'm a seamstress because I had this happen. and to this lady, and I said, but look what you're doing with your material here. I mean, that's beautiful. You've got the colors right. It looks good. There's some motion going on here. It's a beautiful thing that you just made. Let's see if we can put that into paint. And so we go over here and we just translate that. And then, well, I don't know what kind of paint should I use. And I don't know, how do I do this? And I don't know how to use a brush and all that. So there is hand-holding, and there is encouragement, and there is attaboys, and there is attagirls, and there is, you can do this. And maybe that's too simplistic, but that seems
I love face it, go through it.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I love that, Mike. I think
it's that obstacle is the way, right?
Yeah.
On the other side of that thing is a better
There's your growth. There's your growth. And
there's your growth.
Yeah. And I do, in fact, I used to say, some of the counseling that I've done in a church setting, I've used to say, I can't deal with this other person. I said, okay. And why? And well, because I'm afraid that he or she's going to hurt me, or they're going to judge me, like you guys mentioned. And it's like, okay, so let's look at that. Let's look at that. And, or you should look at that. And then I would give them my story. I wouldn't, make them divulge something they're uncomfortable with, but I would tell them some of my stories of what I had to do. And one of the stories that I told and would tell would be my dad. He, the other side of my dad, the non-public side of my dad, he was very physical and very, very black and white in that regard. And so when I moved out of the Southern California area, and my wife and I, Cathy, created our own restaurant up in Redding, California, we came up with one baby and one 2-year-old or 3-year-old, and that became 3. So I have 3 girls, and we were raising them in this restaurant. They were in our backpacks and our front packs. They were in the back room. They were running around, and so it was just a real small family restaurant. And many good things came out of that. Although it was very hard, very physically hard and emotionally hard. But I remember I was probably 35, 36, probably four or so years out of being with my dad in Southern California in the restaurant. And I remember realizing I need to say something to him about my past, about some of the things that happened. And so I took him to a public place, and we had lunch. And I was scared to death because my dad is capable of really hurting me. I mean, he was hitting me when I was 30. But I sat down and I said, Dad, I got 3 girls, and what stuff that happened between us, it's not good. It's not okay to treat your child that way. And I expected him to blow up at me. And you know what, to his credit, God bless my dad, he sat back in his chair and he put his shoulders down and he says, Dan, you're right. I did the best I could, but you're right. And that was like the beginning of friendship between an adult Dan and an adult my father. And we built on that for the last 25 years. And, I just love him to death, but I was scared to death of him. And I was really angry, really an angry young man. And as going back to this other thing, how do you deal with that? There was no other way for me to get to my dad but to face him, but to confront him in a way that was non-threatening, but honest.
Yeah. And
that was transformative for me. That was something pretty special.
But I'll tell you what, transformative for both of you.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I could have not done it outside of my faith, outside of God's grace, outside of many, many people in Redding that I knew at the time who were praying for me. It was not just Dan in the world, Dan against Dawn. It was an effort of family and community.
Dan, can I ask, when you've mentioned a couple times your faith, and can I ask when that became something that you relied on, that was meaningful in your life? Was that always there as a young boy? Was there?
No, I was raised in a Catholic church, and be honest with you, I was afraid to death of the Monsignor and the priest. They freaked me out. there's nothing to say bad about the Catholic Church. It just, in my setting with the way I was raised, I was scared to death. They wanted me to be an altar boy, and I said no, and I can't do that. But there was something inside of me, and I remember from a very little boy reaching out to God. There was a connection there, and so flash forward to college. Dan went off the deep end. I drank and I went crazy and do stupid stuff, really stupid stuff. And I found some friends who were into an Eastern religion called Baha'ism. And they were all about peace and harmony and love and all this stuff. And it really was attractive to me because it was diametrically opposite from what I was raised in. And so I found out on my 21st birthday, I was supposed to go to some ceremony and be inducted or something. I'm not sure what I was supposed to do, but I just turned around and I said, no, I can't do this. There was something inside of me. It was the Lord, but it was something inside of me just saying, no, stop. So I did. And then at the time I had just graduated as a paramedic. I was one of the first paramedics in California. There were no paramedics before then. So I got into this class, which is a whole nother story, but I got into this class with a really low GPA, but I ended up getting into it and ended up graduating and doing well with it. And so I went and became a paramedic, and I came into what they don't teach you in paramedicine is how to deal with real gross trauma. They don't do that. They just tell you how to fix it. And it went deep in me, and it tore me up. So I didn't last very long as a paramedic, even though I've used that knowledge a lot in my life, especially even now. But that brought me to a place where I was broken. And so I went back to the family business, the family restaurant, as a failed paramedic in my mind, and a failed college student, because at the time I only went through 3 years of college. So that was a failure in my mind. I didn't get a degree. That came later. And I'm sitting outside in the patio at closing. And we had a patio and we had a restaurant. And this man came out of nowhere, and nice man. He says, "Hey, I know you're closed. I'm really hungry. Could you please can I have a sandwich?" Sure. I got nowhere to go. I wasn't married. What the heck? Sure. So I opened up the door, made him a sandwich. We went outside again, and I just sat there and talked to him. His name was Jerry Cave. And he started sharing me about the gospel of Christ. And he started telling me about passages out of John. And I forgot to tell you guys this, but in my angry phase in college, I used to go to Christian groups and mock them. I was one of those people. You guys are stupid. You guys, what? You believe what? This is dumb. So anyway, here's this Jerry Cave telling me the same kind of stuff that I was hearing at college in the midst of my chaos and anger, especially with my dad. And in the midst of that, I don't know why, but this other man came out of nowhere. And he sat down with us it was dark, and he sits down at the same table with us, and he's polite and he's nice, and he starts telling this friend of mine, Jerry, how dumb he is and how he's a Buddhist and he's this and he's that and all this kind of stuff. And I just looking at it, it was surreal. The whole thing was surreal. So Jerry invites me the next day. He said, let me show you some passages out of the Bible. Let me give you an idea. Oh, okay. So I go there, and it was revelatory. It was like I had to swim through the traditions of the Catholic Church, Eastern mysticism, my anger, but God cut through all that, and He said, "I'm here. I'm real. I'm here for you." So I'm driving back to where I lived, which was up in the mountains from the high desert, and I just pulled over and I said, "I'm yours. I'm yours. I believe you. That's it." And there was a conversion right there. And I had no idea what I was doing, saying. I didn't have any theology in my mind. I had nothing. I just knew that God touched me and he loved me. So fast forward to...
Can I pause right there?
Sure.
Was that something that you were invited to do, that you were maybe taught to do from the passages you read, or did you feel that need to stop the car?
I didn't have enough theology or Bible knowledge to put in your finger, your pinky. I sensed that God was there. The presence of the Spirit was there. And he was reaching out to me in such a way that I was driving. I almost rolled off the road. I was crying. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, Jerry said, if I just ask you, you'll help me. And I did. I said, okay. And he met me right there, right then. And
I just love how intuitive, though. It's not just stopping the car. It's the surrender.
It's the surrender.
Because now as you have learned and as you have studied, you understand those things, but it's like your soul knows.
Yeah.
But that's the step to take.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think it's interesting that we go through these things that are difficult, that try us, that, you know, that push us, right? You're dealing with your father, some of your anger there. You're dealing with some other things that are going on in life. And those things, they sort of, they make us a little more malleable, right?
They do. They do. Preparing the soil. Yep.
Right. And we kind of get to that point where we're like, you know, that anger sort of melts and we can surrender. The word surrender is a great word.
Well, and Tyler, it's like that quote I texted you, right? Jeffrey R. Holland says, man's extremity is God's opportunity, right? When we are pushed,
that's right.
When we are
Otherwise,
stressed,
we're usually too comfortable.
Or right? Yep. It's like we're open.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. I dig that thought of just surrender. I'm yours. And it's not a 60% thing.
No.
Right.
This is all the way.
It's like, I'm not yours on Sunday. I'm yours.
Yeah. Well, for me, there was no attraction to a church, to theology, to tradition. Mm-hmm. It was the encounter with the living God.
Yeah. Well, that's a powerful experience. I love that.
Tyler, I'm going to have to add this question because this will be 2 straight episodes, right? We had Tony Giovanello on last week, and we started talking about passages that might be written on our hearts. So Dan, is there, and this could be hard, this could be like who's your favorite kid, right? Do you have a passage of scripture that everybody would know? Yeah, that's Dan. That's written on his heart. That's how he lives. Let us consider how to stimulate and encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Out of Hebrews, that whole relation thing, not just with God, but with God and somebody else. Hence, you know, Stephen Mitchell and I are just 2 crazy people when it comes to that stuff. I just absolutely love seeing how not only God is all about and literally all about relationship, but how it pleases him and blesses us when we can have a viable, dynamic relationship with others. But especially with him, you know, as he brings people across. The present job I'm in, and one of the reasons I'm in healthcare, is because I can daily make a difference in people's lives. I can actually, whether it's cooking for them, which I don't do anymore, or whether it's fixing something, or whether it's managing something, or whether it's creating something, I can come home and I can go, wow, I had such a great conversation with this person who was so lonely and so hurt. I had such a wonderful interaction with this person who's struggling like crazy and doesn't know what to do because they're so hurt from somebody else. And I can, it's relationship. It's just all about relationship.
Dan, you said earlier, artwork has been my ministry. Mm-hmm. And you also said, I think in our pre-show call, that your current job is your ministry as well. Yeah. And it's interesting. I told Mike after we got off the call with you the other day, I said, gosh, I want to talk about that. Like that's fascinating to me. But as you're talking now, and I'm just picturing this group of business leaders taking 2x2 squares of the Sundial Bridge, and Dan's having a one-on-one conversation. You see where I'm going with this, Mike?
Yeah, no, it's 100%.
This idea of ministry, right? It's right there. You're creating this relationship. It's breaking down barriers, right?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they can see the artwork.
But there's gospel principles in that.
You
100%,
got you right.
right?
The pen is in your hand, and
You
like,
bet.
Well, how do we see God, right? We have to break down that. We have to take away the inhibitions.
Well, there's a whole story in itself. I mean,
and who is God but a creator, right?
Yeah.
You bet.
I got it. Dan, fill me in on that. What's you got to keep going there. Tell me about that. You said there's a story there. I'd like to hear that.
Well, after my encounter with the living God,
Love that word, encounter.
and then
right?
I immediately went into a very structured denominational church, and that was great. But I wasn't getting the same connection as I was getting with God. It was more about rules and there's something called a closed set and an open set. Closed set would be, I've got a square, I got a box, whatever, and in that box is the rules. And in the middle of the box is the cross of Christ, okay, his sacrifice and what he does. But on this side of the cross in this box is, you read your Bible, you pray, you do all this stuff that you do to be a Christian.
We got check boxes.
Right. And then what happens is it starts to degrade depending on where you're going to church, what denomination you're going to church, what's your belief system, what their belief system. And it starts getting into, well, if you wear your dress is too short, and if your hair is too long, and if you smoke, oh my gosh, if you're not damned, you're not a very good Christian, at least at the very minimum. That's a closed set. Open set is, here's the cross, and there's all these arrows which represent people, and they could be 3 miles down the road, but they're pointing towards Christ. Okay, now we got a chance, because there's that relationship connection that's happening. And if you're right next to, if you happen to be one of those arrows that's right next to the cross, well, God bless you. It's a wonderful place to be, but you're also human, so you're going to fall away from that. But the dynamic of the relationship that happens in an open set is fantastic. So I got to a place where I was so frustrated with listening on the radio, or listening to a priest, or listening to a pastor, or listening to a person who was some kind of a Christian authority. And they were telling me, this is the only way you should believe, because this is the right theology. This is the right way to interpret the Bible. This is the right way to live. This is it. Well, then this guy over here would refute that, and it would just drive me nuts. So I was, 37, 38, something like that. And I went back to college. I went to Simpson University, and I got a degree in Bible, because I wanted to know myself. I didn't want to just trust some guy who's got the authority and got the title. And what happened was I realized that I was a pastor, and I didn't know it. Just like I didn't know I was an artist. And so, I went on some mission trips down to Mexico and overseas, and Poland, right after the walls came down, and had some fantastic things happen. Oh my gosh. It just opened my eyes to the vibrancy of God and the vibrancy of relationships. And so from that, I thought, okay, I guess, Cathy, I want to be a pastor. You want to, be my pastor's wife? And Cathy goes, I don't know. So because of my personality and my nature, I'm not saying this is it should be true for anybody else, but I just don't do politics real well. And church politics were really weighing on me. And so I went through, I got my degree, bachelor's, and I sat before the board, and I got, and I went out and preached a little bit, and I got it wrong. And I went back into my food, and I went back into art, and back into life and raising kids. And I found out that my ministry is what's before me. And so I ministered through using art and creativity through food for a very long time. I can't tell you how many weddings I have done, how many very large, like the Civic Center. I would fill that up, and I would be the guest chef, and I would teach them. I would be invited into people's homes, and I would be the celebrity chef that would come along. had a little stint with KRC RTV on a TV show for a while. I've been published, been in papers, and spoke to many men's groups about relationships with my brokenness with my father. And I realized it doesn't matter where I'm at. Make it your ministry. And I've been able to do that through God's grace. So
that's great. I love that. So that's something and I can tell, you're saying it now, but in your previous stories, I mean, obviously you're cognizant of that idea of ministering in all of those things that you're doing, whether it's,
it doesn't matter.
Right?
It doesn't matter. This lady came up to me the other day at work, and I hadn't seen her for a while. And she's just a sweetheart. She's a retired psychologist. And said, "How you doing? You look a little under the weather." "Well, I'm going under chemotherapy." "Oh my gosh." And she's like in her room, like set away. And she's, so I prayed. Let's, I'm here. What can we do? That kind of stuff happens to me a lot, because the times that I don't turn my face away from God and I'm in touch with his grace and his ears and his eyes to see, ears to hear, man, there's so many opportunities out there. So many opportunities, no matter what you're doing. Even the vendors that come on to repair stuff, I'm in their lives. "Hey, what did you do? Oh, how'd you learn this? Well, that's really great. You got a family?" And off we go. and everybody at work gets equal harassment from me. There's nobody who can't be harassed by me. These old guys will come along and you can tell them they're all like this. Of course, I'm an old guy, but these guys are much older than me, right? So, and they're walking around and stuff. And I said, "Hank, you getting in trouble yet?" "No." "Well, let's get going." And they just crack up, and it's like, yes,
right.
I love that.
I love that. Yeah.
Something that Dan, I've been thinking about. There's a reference, 1 Thessalonians talks about quench not the spirit.
You bet.
What does that phrase mean to you? I got some thoughts on it, but I'm dying to know what
Okay,
you think about that.
Good to hear. I think I got this one. Not that I got.
Sorry
it
to leave
down,
the script a little bit.
No.
Let's go.
I don't have it down as in I'm always doing this, but I got it. I think years ago, I was thinking about. I think I was in Thessalonians. I was in Romans. I was messing around with scripture, right? And I kept seeing this theme, and so I grabbed a hold of it and I put it out there. And several pastors and several friends thought I was insane, but I now that I'm 67, I'm going to say it because I think I'm right to a point. And that is this.
I dig that preface, by the way.
Yeah. I think the most, you see like Lord of the Rings and all these epic stories of good and evil, right? And they're battling and they're doing their thing. What is all that really about? If you go down below it, what powers that? And in my opinion, it's the human free will. I think the human free will, this is a strong statement, I'm going to make it, is the most valuable thing, the most precious thing outside of God's love in the entire universe. And so when I exercise my free will and engage it with God, I am doing what Thessalonians doesn't want us to do. I'm not quenching the spirit. But when I say, "You know what, God, I got it. I got it. I got it. I handle this." I'm quenching it. I'm quenching it big time, because my free will, even though his grace is amazing, and it's there for me to plunge into and grab a hold of and relish in. If it's my pride or my fear, usually it's fear for me, it says, no, I'm going to work through this. I'm quenching.
I'm going to work through this. Yeah.
But you know what? I love that what you said. You talk about the importance of free will. Mm-hmm. And then you said, when I have that free will and I combine that with God, right, there's amazing things that happen. I think that there's people now that there would be an argument right on the other side that,
certainly
that stifles our free will. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's so interesting. It's counterintuitive. We have this free will, we combine it with the power of God, and now we can do these amazing things. Sure. But I think the secular world would tell us, shoot, that inserting God into that equation.
It would be like Dan. It would be like Dan going to the Christians in college and making fun of them, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
how old fashioned
absolutely.
are you? They're telling you how to live. And it's like, you know what? When
Exactly.
God has given you everything, what is the only thing to give but your will?
Exactly right. And you know
Right?
what? God is literally the fountain, the source of, the deep well of freedom and grace and mercy and joy and laughter, and, all the fruits of the Spirit. He's it. So if I'm engaged in that kind of character that is built in God, that is definitely freedom. It's just freedom.
I love it, man.
Yeah. To people listening, I do this. I am guilty of this. Tyler, I'm sure you're guilty of this, right? We have these things, and they are maybe they're creative impulses. Maybe they're thoughts of a brother that's in trouble, a friend that needs help, and you push it down like, I'll get to that. Mm-hmm. Right? I'll get to that later.
Oh,
right?
Or I got this. I got this.
Yeah.
I got it.
That's that. And we are guilt. That's that quench not the spirit, because like that's, imagine, Dan, if you didn't stop that car that day.
Yep.
Imagine if you feel his presence, that veil is so thin, and you're like, nah, and you turn the radio up.
Well,
exactly.
And we do that.
That's an exercise of free will right there. You bet.
Yeah. And I just think of, sitting at that table, listening to, was it Jerry talk to you about, share some scriptures with you. And then this other person comes into right. It's like, and it starts giving the opposite view, right? I just think it's
really almost like God is, it's almost like God is setting the table before Dan. Yeah. Dan.
Oh, definitely.
2 people to listen to right here.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
What would you like to do? And you're like, I'm going to choose Jerry.
It is really interesting though. But I do think that all of those, again, going back to that idea that all of those experiences, as you said, Dan, is kind of churning that soil, right?
Yeah.
And
you got to have good soil. If you don't have good soil, the seeds, as we know, with the whole parable of the seeds, I mean, it's just gonna bloom, but then it's gonna die because it doesn't have deep roots.
Yeah. Well, and Tyler, I've got Tylerisms bouncing around in my head from time to time, right? And one of them is like multiple on-ramps.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like the story of Dan. Here's your one shot.
No.
I'm going to send Jerry, and you better crush it. Right.
No.
That's
not his character.
He loves his children.
The description of compassion and mercy and all, right, is okay. You missed that one. Here's another shot at it.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
Well, a good worldview on that is that story or poem that we've probably all heard over time, which is, the footprints in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you? My child died. Where were you? I lost my job. Where were you? I've got cancer. Where were you? I was right here. I was holding you. Those are my footprints.
Right.
That's his character.
Yeah. Man's extremity is God's opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. Where you are stretched, that's his chance. Right.
You bet.
And another thought I just can't get out of my head these days is, in our church, we're studying the Old Testament, and I love some of the stories of the Old Testament, right?
They're pretty amazing. Yeah.
It is this witness that the battle is his. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, I'm going to show you that you can't do this by yourself.
Exactly.
Like Gideon comes to mind.
Yes.
Gideon has this monumental task, this monumental battle scene, true, like epic, right?
Right.
And I'm going to give you 300 people. And I'm going to give you 300 people so that it wasn't your hand that saved.
Exactly.
And all you have to do, I love the verse, and Tyler, I shared that with you earlier.
Yeah.
Every man stand in his place. Right. And so Dan, you've talked a little bit about a men's group that helped you through some things. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, Stephen does not describe you as a friend. He describes you as a brother in Christ.
Yes.
Right. So likewise, when you hear this phrase, every man stand in his place, and you're on a podcast called The Richest Men in Town, what does that stir up in you?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. we in the various denominations and churches that I belong to, there was something they put the name to a growth group or home group or whatever. It's got different names, and that set the stage for me to go deeper with a group, usually mixed people, not just men, but and do what we're doing right now, talking about and relishing over and in a mocking way, solving the world's problems, but it's also getting support, and it's getting that encouragement. I mentioned earlier in my youth, I didn't really have a lot of positive feedback, but there was this one aunt. Her name was Aunt Ada. Gosh, she was the only relative I had who used to tell me this when I was 12 and 13 years old. Dan, someday, and this is some little squat, short, fat Italian lady. She was awesome. She had old whiskers on her chin, and she was just radiating God. She just loved God. She was a very devout Catholic, but that was secondary. She just loved God. And she would come up to me and she'd point her finger at me. She said, Dan, and she had a big smile on her face. She said, someday I can see it. You're going to go to the moon and back. You're going to be amazing. And I would just look at her like, what? What? But she believed in me. And she gave me that impetus. And that's kind of what you can get in a group setting where it's not a bigger formal setting, which there's reason and purpose for that, of course. But that intimacy, that sharpening iron versus sharpening iron, which, Stephen and I think Stephen Mitchell, we've somewhere over 20 years, we've met almost every weekend. And every weekend we pull out scripture, we pull out a book that has to do with scripture, and we just go for it. We do what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. And I am just super blessed from that. And so is he. And yet this men's group that I belong to, in a critical time when I was really, really ill, I was so ill. I lost job. I almost lost my family. I almost lost my life on a couple of times because the illness was pretty dramatic. And this group of guys from Bethel, and God bless Bethel because it's all over the place, but I love the heart of it. And these guys were all artists. They were all over the top artists. They were all way loud and crazy like my Italian family. And we loved each other. And we would encourage one another in our art, but in also our struggles in our lives. And we truly, when I finally got over my illness, one of those guys came up to me, and I was going back into the real world to work. And I was scared. I literally hadn't worked for years, and I didn't know if I could still cook, let alone make money at it. And my first foray into healthcare was to be a cook in the back kitchen for these people with dementia. And I guess I'm doing it. And he looked at me. His name's Stephen. And he looked at me and says, God gave me this, and I'm going to give it to you. Walk in confidence. Walk in, not that you feel so confident and arrogant. No, just walk in what he has instilled in you, what I've seen in you, what others have seen in you. Walk in that. And when you walk in that confidence, he will be all over you. And what happened was, and I have found this out to be true, especially with dementia, the human brain, when you are demented enough, is very, very childlike. And like a small child, when their parent is stressed, angry, afraid, they pick it up. They may not be able to process it, but they pick it up. And it's the same thing with dementia. And, it wasn't very long before this particular encounter happened based on his advice. There was a little man, his name was Lee, little Asian fellow, and he was amazing, but he was always quiet, and he had a bent neck, and his dementia was such that he couldn't talk anymore. And he hadn't talked for over a year. And I noticed that he liked art. He kept looking at different things around the building. And so I read his little bio on the door, and it said he was an artist. He was a professional artist. And he did the kind of art at the time that I did, which was taking junk metal and making stuff. And I said, I came up to him, and his head's all bent. And he comes in every morning, and he just pours the sugar into his coffee. I mean, he just pours it in there, right? And then he stirs it, and then he takes this little sip, and then he goes, sits down. And that's Lee. That was all he ever did. So I got my head down with him, and I said, Lee, I hear you're an artist. I'm an artist, and I would love to see some of your work. And what he did is he came up out of it. He straightened his head. He turned to me. He looked me right in the eyes. He says, "I would love to show you my art." And then he went back down into his thing, and I never heard another word from him. But I thought, thank you, Lord. Thank you. You know, if I had been timid, if I had been afraid, if I had been, oh, I don't know what to do with these people because they're a little scary because they're not normal. And I can tell you story after story after story of things that encounter similar to that.
I just am connecting some dots here, right? In the beginning of this episode, Mike asked the question, what's one thing every man should be able to do? And you said, be self-aware. Mm-hmm. And here we are talking about really identity, right? On a spiritual level. And man, if we were all to that point, right, where we could recognize our divine nature, right, to a certain degree, and know who we are. Own it. Yeah, right. Own it. I love that advice. Like, hey, walk in there
and talk to people like they're right.
Yeah, don't do it
like
in
brother
arrogance,
to brother,
but
100%.
Person to
go
person.
Deep.
We talk about this all the time. This divine or miraculous consequences. If we know who we are, all these things start to fall into place, right? We all of a sudden we treat the people around us better. We treat strangers better. We're more patient. We're more kind. We're more willing to give because we know who we are, right? As I love that advice. I think it's really interesting that, hey, walk in there, own it, not arrogance, but just knowing who you are. That's great advice. I love it.
So Dan, I'm going to reveal in the pre-show call, you said you had mentioned a period in your life when you were sick. And then you said something that caught our attention, and I gotta go there a little bit, right? You said that it transformed you and it was wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about that? We have guests on the show and we often ask, can you name something that you've learned in life the hard way? It sounds like that 6 or 7 years of battling illness taught you some things. Can you share?
Yeah. Well, I'll come at this sideways, I think. One of the things that it taught me, and I didn't know that it was, and I didn't know it until I became a healthcare worker and started dealing with dementia, was I could so relate to those people at a deep level because of my illness. Basically, in a nutshell, my illness was started with me feeling flu-like for months. I just couldn't feel normal. So I went to a doctor and I said, "Doctor, I just feel nauseous, weak. I just don't feel good. I don't feel right. I feel like I have the flu all the time." So he sent me to a specialist who sent me to a specialist who sent me to another specialist and another one and another one. And if you want to fast forward maybe 5 years from that point, I was on 14 medicines. I had a brain bleed because of the medicines. I had pharmacological, looking back at it, I had pharmacological dementia because I was misdiagnosed 3 times with 3 different diseases that were life-threatening. And 2 more years beyond that, I said, this is just insane. I'm not even myself anymore. I didn't look myself. I was all puffed out and addicted to medicines of all kinds. 14 medicines, that's a whole cocktail. And none of these doctors would talk to each other. They would just give me medicine every time I went with a complaint. So I went to UCSF and I saw one of the people in the world, the top people in the world on these diseases that I supposedly had. And 15 minutes later, he said, "Dan, you don't have any of this stuff. What's your problem is you've been misdiagnosed and you need to get off all these medicines, every single one of them, get them off." It took me a year. When I got off of them, that's when I got into healthcare and I was back. And it was like, holy cow, what in the heck was all that about? Getting back to what did I learn? Up to that point, I was a personality. I was a local or regional personality. Women, men would come up to me and oogle and ogle like they can do on TV with other chefs. And, this is before the internet, of course. And, I'm on TV, I'm being published. Oh my gosh, let's go in and see what he's doing now. And let's invite him over to our house and let's fawn over him, which I hated. I really hated that. I love being creative. It sounds
miserable, doesn't it,
Tyler?
Tyler?
It was horrible. It was really bad. But what it did is it wiped me out, and I was just basically exhausted and stressed. That was my problem, not all these diseases and all these drugs. So What did I learn? Because I was raised to just believe a doctor and just do what he says and don't argue. And I don't no longer believe that, but that's what I was raised to be. So what I learned is piece by piece, God deconstructed me. Not that I don't have ego and don't have pride. And in those years I didn't, of course did as well, as I'm human. But he took away a lot of that. In fact, there was a time where some of the people that I was really close to and associated with were so distressed over my situation or embarrassed, they left us. They left my wife. They left me. We were no longer friends. And it's like, where'd you go? And it was really tough. So, and I understand part of it. I mean, I was an ongoing crazy person. I was not myself. And when I came back to myself, the relationship of God, and part of that too was Stephen. He knew me a lot through all that, and that iron sharpening iron. And he saw me at my worst, and he was faithful. He prayed like crazy for me. He's a wonderful prayer, and then he went through something as well in his life with teaching, and so I was there for him. And what did I learn? I learned that the importance of the human free will, engaging with God, and his grace isn't just some theological concept. His grace is life. It's bread. It's water. It's everything that we need. And that he's not scary. I had a heck of a time praying to God the Father most of my life. And when I went through all that, and I found the heart of the Father through worship, through prayer, through the scripture. I found the heart of the Father. That was the first time I could actually pray to God the Father. And I know it's, there's a whole Trinity thing, and then it gets into some messy stuff for some people, but it was like I was more complete because I could see the wholeness of God in his Spirit, in the Son, and in the Father. I could see the dynamic of that. And I was just drawn to it like a moth. And it allowed me to get to a place to not worry about how many times I was oogled and awed over, or what I did, or what accomplished, or how many ice sculptures I can do, or what food I can do, or what kind of art I could do. But to just take this stuff that I've got, God gave it to me, and bless people, put it out there and love on them and watch them and bless them, because I was blessed and I was supported. And, my wife was a big part of that too. She hung in there, and there was a lot to hang into, because I was a crazy person.
Let's get into that. Can you tell us about Cathy? How did she come into your life, and what does she mean to you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I went through this whole trauma thing with paramedics, thinking that, I was going to be a great paramedic. And actually, I think I was pretty good, but as far as my knowledge and what to do in such circumstances. But there was an event that happened, and I don't go into graphics, but it was 2 whole families died in front of me in my arms. And I didn't know how to handle that emotionally. I just didn't know how to handle it. I mean, I had 8 people die in front of me. And I felt incompetent and irresponsible, and it tore me apart. So I went right back to the restaurant. I said, I'm done. I can't do this. I went back to the family business, and I was there. And then all of a sudden, this really cute gal, she's actually quite beautiful. But anyway, she came in, and I looked at her, and she goes, can I help? I said, can I help you? And she goes, well, I work here. I said, you do? She says, yeah. I said, oh. She says, yeah, I've been at school, and I'm coming back to see, is Don here? Don, my dad's name. And I said, well, no, he's not here right now, but I'm your boss, apparently. And she looked at me, and she goes, what? I said, yeah, I'm Don's son, and I'm your boss. And that's how we met. And then our first date was, I had this big, ugly yellow Chevy truck. I mean, it was like 4 miles long.
Ooh, that's your dream, Tyler. That's your
my
dream.
It is a
truck.
dream. I mean, I need,
bench seat,
Absolutely.
the whole thing. So we went to
like Jack and Diane. Like,
we went to
Cougar
what was
Mellencamp
it called? The
song.
Joshua Tree Drive-In or something. Anyway, it's probably no longer in existence. But we went to this drive-in, put the things on there, and I'm talking Italian, which means I'm moving my hands. And so I'm talking Italian, and we're watching Clint Eastwood, The Good, Bad, and Ugly, or one of those spaghetti westerns. And she's got white pants on, right, and a cute little top, and I'm in my jeans and talking away like this, and she had an orange drink, and I knocked it over right on her pants. So that was my first date. So she has a remarkable. We are so opposite. Oh my gosh, she's brilliant. She has a PhD in psychology. She has a master's in math and pastoral counseling. She's brilliant in those ways, and she's also very creative too. And we have learned to do art together. I'm sitting in her art room right now with quilts. She's a quilter, and she's an amazing quilter. Some of the stuff is just unbelievable. And we have learned to do a dance, because I can see things she can't. She can see things I can't, and she's awesome. Anyway, getting back to my bad years, my sick years, she was faithful. She was patient to a point. I can't blame her. And she, we had considered leaving, going our different ways at one point, and God wouldn't let me do that. Absolutely not. And to her credit, she chose the same path. And I was out of control. I was not a happy camper and not fun to be around. And we learned how to be friends, really deep, good, quality friends. And we have such a wonderful relationship now, but it was really rocky there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
How long have you and Cathy been together?
We've been together 44 years, which we'll have our 44th anniversary in June. So a little over that time.
That's awesome.
Raised three amazing girls. I got two grandchildren now with my middle girl. And I'm blessed. Absolutely blessed.
So Dan, Tyler and
awesome.
I are coming up on a fun season in our lives where our children will be choosing who they're in the trenches with. Mm-hmm. Right. Looking back on your relationship.
Oh my gosh.
With Cathy, how did you know? Right? How did you know that? I don't know where you're at with soulmate. I don't know where you're at with some of these things.
I was very idealistic in that point in my life, which that's nothing necessarily wrong with, but I was, into John Denver and the Gushy Mushy songs and all that stuff. And Cathy,
we could have hung out, Dan. I could have hung out with you.
Yeah. So I can sense that. Yes. But, Cathy's, she was just in a different plane of thinking and being, and she was an athlete. She played softball. She's a high scholastic person, brilliant in that regard. And we couldn't have been any more different. And so there was that, the opposites attract. But
see, Dan, this is generalists like you and I. Mm-hmm. We need a specialist in our lives.
Yes, and she is.
That's how it works.
She is totally specialist. In fact, she's amazing with math. And in fact, what she presently does is work with spreadsheets. And when we first got married, she goes, so how much do you have in the bank? I'm not sure. Well, how do you not know? Well, I write checks, and when the money's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
And well, how do you track that? It's in my checkbook. I was lost in that regard, right? Lost just completely. And so we have over the years, she's a good cook, but I do most of the cooking. She does most of the bills. I do most of the cleaning. She does, we have our
Make it
ways.
Work.
Yeah. And it works really well. But
I love it.
Yep.
Hey, Dan, we, in this space, in this podcast, one of the things that Mike and I have started to find important and that we've learned through the course of 80 some episodes is the importance of honoring people in our lives. And
Mm.
you've talked about some of those people in your life. You talked about Aunt Ida, you talked about Jerry, you've talked about some of these people. And you've talked about obviously Cathy and the impact she's had in your life. Is there anyone else that you'd like to honor in this space?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, definitely. First off, my 3 daughters, they're all so different, as you guys could probably relate to. You know, children often do that. There's Becky, who is very much like Cathy. She's grounded. She's very intelligent in the ways that I describe, and she just loves and adores me. And I just appreciate her appreciation of me and of what I've done in my life. And she's just there for me. And I just love Becky to death for that. Then there's Amy, who's my typical middle child. She's a little blend of a little bit of everything, and yet she's herself. And she's the one who has been able to give us a couple of grandchildren. And she has been, from the very beginning, she was built to be a mom. She is amazing. She is such an example to me to how to parent and how to encourage and how to protect. And she's amazing. Absolutely a fantastic daughter. Also very brilliant. And then there's my Hannah. She's my wild child who lights up a room. She comes into a room and just lights it up. She's got tattoos everywhere. She's a hairdresser of renown. She is super creative. She is fiercely loyal. And her biggest thing for all of her life is she loves to find strays, whether they be animals or people, brings them in and loves on them. And gosh, she's blessed me a lot. And in fact, recently I took her to the coast because I live close to the coast here in Santa Rosa. And just the 2 of us, we had an encounter with God, with each other, with nature that was unbelievable. And I just appreciate Hannah. I appreciate her creativity and her vibrancy for life and her passion for people.
So Dan, you mentioned that experience that you had with Hannah, and that leads me to ask this question. I'm talking to an artist here, so paint me a picture if you can. Can you share with us a memory of a moment somewhere in your life when you truly felt rich?
A number of them. There's the daily stuff because of where I work and how God has equipped me. I really struggle with people doting on me or whatever, and he's this, he's so that. But the jobs that I have come into within healthcare have been, usually I end up being the repair guy, the guy who comes and fixes from somebody else's disasters. So I'm a cleanup man, and I do my job, and I think I do it mostly well, not always, but I'm mostly. And I've got people doing. The other day, there was this whole convention. These elders are what they call independent living, so they're not dementia. They're just normal old people, and they all stood up and started clapping for the things that I've been able to do for them for the last 2 years. That's how long I've been in this particular job. And I part of me just wants to, then I thought, would you just be gracious and just listen to that? Thank you, Lord. Thank you. But thank you. I felt really rich then. I also feel really rich often with my wife.
Take it in and send it up, right?
Yeah, take it in, send it up. And same thing with my wife. Often we know each other so well. Our banter is awesome. we just go for it. And we'll drive. What are we gonna do today? On a weekend or something, honey? And she go, well, I don't know. We'll shop and we'll do this, we'll do that. And we have so many good conversations. Not always, but mostly. And I'm often in awe of that. I'm often really blessed for that, especially from where we've come, especially from the brokenness that happened and from the stress of having 2 restaurants together and working through all those young kid years and all the stuff that comes with parenting. My 2 cents there would be, it's way too easy in today's society to just walk away. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah. I love that you, when you're talking about those moments, and in particular your moments with Cathy, you kind of reminisce about the difficulties, right, of raising children and doing all these other things, and how that has sweetened the relationship, you know.
Definitely.
To travel through those things together. I appreciate you sharing those moments.
Can I ask? I'm dying to know this question. We talk about hinge moments a lot on the program. Why Reading?
John Denver again. Almost
everything goes back to John Denver.
West Virginia. You know, I mean, I came from the desert, right? And so when you look at Reading, it's like heaven compared to the Mojave Desert.
Okay.
So, you know, brown rocks, cactus.
This episode is brought to you by the City of Reading Chamber of Commerce.
There you go. Right. So, you know, I see trees and water and I'm thinking, yeah, let's go there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It is a beautiful
Not knowing
place.
that, you know, 110 degree weather and all that stuff, but yeah,
Right,
because everybody's got the Reading stories, right? Oh my God, how do you live there? You know, it's so hot. I got out in July and it was horrible. Well, okay, but the rest of the year's not that bad, you know. So,
well, Dan, there's a lot of there's a lot of folks here in Reading that are grateful that you're a John Denver fan and that led you up here.
That's great. That's great.
Well, Dan, it's sort of hard to believe that we've spent as much time as we have together. I mean, it's, you know, we're creeping up on a couple hours, and
wow, really?
Yeah. And I've loved it. You know, one of the things that's been a huge blessing with this podcast is the people that I get to meet. And, you know, you meet people every day, but not every day do you get to sit down and have a couple hours worth of conversation with someone.
Amen.
And really get to know them. And I appreciate the lessons that you've shared today. I feel richer because of our conversation that we've had today. And you know, the theme of this podcast is really about getting better, progressing. You know, I love that idea of self-awareness, of learning who we are and perfecting that, you know, of who we are. But I'm curious for you, Dan, what does it mean to you to be considered the richest man in town?
Humbled. When I was in those darker years that I mentioned, I had for lack of a better word, a vision. I'm not going to go there and give it a official title, but I had a vision. I had this thing in my mind that went on, and it was like God was saying, you know, Dan, I'm going to plant your roots deep, and I'm going to make you like a mighty oak, and the winds are going to come and the storm's going to beat you, but you're going to be like this. Because at that time I was anything but a rooted, strong tree. It was just absolutely not. And I'm thinking valley oaks, you know, the big, beautiful valley oaks in your area. And I'm there in his grace. I'm there. And it's just amazing. And, you know, I got to say one more shout out too. A big part of that has been the patience, the humor, and the creativity I've shared with Stephen. Guys, if you can find anybody who's listening to this, if you can find that person or persons, but that person that is willing to walk the walk with you, you know, that's Stephen Mitchell for me. It's also my family. It's also Cathy. It's also me, but it's that man on man thing. It's necessary, and it's so freaking hard for men to let down the barrier and try that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if Stephen told you this, but when we first met, it was at a men's retreat. Here's this, and forgive me, Stephen, but here's this hippie dude that, you know, and I'm like redneck, you know, redneck Dan, and he's Mr. Freeform hippie dude, right? And here's this hippie dude who's just totally, we just connected. We just made that connection. And he also fished, and I fished. You know, we were fly fishermen, so we're out there fly fishing, sharing about everything and anything. If people can make that initial connection and bring it before God, and bring it before Scripture, and bring it before accountability, and bring it before honesty, slowly, not like throw it all out there, but slowly build trust, because trust is the core of my relationship with Cathy, my girls, with Stephen, with other people in my life that I consider special and important. so many times I've seen people just rush into these things, and it's almost like the romantic "I'm in love" kind of stuff. No, if you can just build on that brick by brick by brick, that's it. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think what I love about our time, it feels, to the outside person looking at this, they may say this feels contrived. Tyler and Mike are going to sit down with somebody that they've never met, and over the course of a couple of hours, they're going to make that connection,
have a relationship, and
90 times.
Well, you guys, it is contrived sounding, but it's not.
Yeah, right.
It's absolutely not. It's just like looking from the outside at God. It's like, well, how am I going to trust a guy who's angry and lets babies die? But when you find the character of God and he reveals himself to you, it makes sense. And when you have two men who I didn't know until 2 days ago, and that was just briefly, and we had a talk like we've had today, I am blessed. You guys, thank you for following this.
Dan, I think our listeners would agree with you 100%, right? They're going to be having this experience with you, and they're going to be feeling connection through the words, and quite frankly, the spirit that I feel as I interact with you, right? Because there is something about, when we talk about trust, authenticity is in that, right? Competence is in that, and connection is in that. Like, that's, in my mind, pretty simple mind, but that's the ingredient. If I'm going to bake you a trust cake, those are the ingredients, right? If we're not being authentic, if we can't be vulnerable, if we don't have people in our lives, Tyler, you're always talking about the people that we surround ourselves with, right? If there's not some way to be authentic and connect and have some competence in the room, we're in danger. Because I agree that self-awareness is huge, but I don't care how good you are, there will be blind spots.
Oh, you betcha.
Absolutely.
And there will be time where it's like, hold me accountable here because I need some help.
Well,
exactly right.
What I love too is this, I want people in my life that have deep roots, that are the strong oaks. And here we go, right? Tonight we spent some time together.
Yeah.
Dan is now one of my oaks, and I appreciate that.
You guys make me smile.
Yeah. It's that concept of lower lights, right, Tyler? Like, I need to get in the harbor. I need to get into a safe harbor, and the lighthouse is nice, but there's crags and there's things that I can't see in the approach to the harbor.
Amen.
Those lower lights, I line them up to the Savior, right? That helps me get home.
Amen.
And Dan, Tyler, Stephen, our other friends, they're all part of that process for me to align myself. Like, what does this look like? Right? Sometimes that question of like, what would Jesus do? That's the answer's perfect, right? But what would my good friend do right now? Let's ask him. Right? Let's pick up the phone. Let's connect and say, I got a situation. Can you walk me through? What am I not seeing here? Because the stakes are too high to crash this thing into the coast, right?
Right.
Too high.
Right. Amen.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I love the way you showed up tonight, and I thank you. I thank you for being who you are. You are a gift to the people that you work with. You're a gift to Cathy, and you're a gift to us tonight. So thank you. And I might need to buy Steven some lunch, right? Because he did, maybe a finder's fee or something.
I'm sure he would take you up on it easily.
It's been a blast, Dan. I'm grateful for the time we've been able to spend with you. I'm grateful to say that I know you, and I know that we'll be having more conversations.
Yeah, I hope this just doesn't stop. Yeah, this is great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we appreciate you, and tell Cathy we said thanks for lending you to us tonight. And
certainly.
And you have a great night.
Thank you.
Good idea, Ernie. A toast to my big brother George. the richest man in town.